Johannesburg is hit by a powerful car bomb just 2 days before South Africa begins its first all-race elections. We'll spend part of the hour on that situation in South Africa. I'm Jeanne Meserve in Washington. We'll start this hour by going live to Johannesburg. Bernard Shaw joins us from that city with the latest on today's violence. Bernie?
Thank you, Jeanne. 2 days from now, the people of South Africa will begin voting in this country's first all-race elections. Today, they received a violent reminder of how some people will do almost anything to disrupt the vote. About 10 hours ago, a car bomb exploded here in Johannesburg, the largest city in South Africa. It went off near 2 offices of Nelson Mandela's African National Congress. One of them, called Shell House, is the ANC's national headquarters. At least 9 people died in the explosion. More than 100 were injured. Among those killed, a local ANC candidate. CNN's Peter Arnett has more.
Downtown Johannesburg Sunday looked more like the worst days of Beirut than a city on the verge of free elections. The powerful car bomb, loaded with as much as 200 pounds of explosives, set other vehicles ablaze and ripped through buildings on both sides of the street. Storefronts and windows were demolished in businesses along 2 city blocks that adjoin the national and regional headquarters of the African National Congress Party.
The explosion was so big. I don't know what happened.
Just standing there, then it went off.
Passers-by and store attendants were cut down by the force of the blast. With Sunday a holiday, only a relatively small number of people were in this business district of the city, thereby averting a much larger toll of dead and wounded. Johannesburg has known much violence. The police say this is the worst terrorist act in the history of the city. Eyewitness reports are conflicting as to who might have planted the bomb, but one eyewitness says he saw a white person running off.
We saw the one guy that was in the back. Now we didn't see where they went to.
The militant right-wing Afrikaner resistance movement, which has threatened to use violence to disrupt the elections, denied responsibility for this attack. Police sources told CNN that the ANC headquarters was probably the main target of the bombers. Angry crowds gathered at police barriers, but ANC officials called for supporters to keep calm.
The majority of people of our country are not going to allow terrorism to become the feature of this country.
A police spokesman echoed his caution.
Well, we're hoping that people will not overreact. We're hoping that people will not use this and create more violence.
National police forces began an immediate on-the-scene investigation, but said they would be hampered because the car carrying the bomb was completely destroyed in the explosion. A police spokesman said the downtown area of Johannesburg would be sealed off for at least 2 days and probably through the election period beginning Tuesday. Army units also moved in to further secure the area. South Africa has experienced a marked decline in violence these recent days, but this incident has reminded people just how fragile the situation here remains. Peter Arnett, CNN, Johannesburg.
African National Congress leader Nelson Mandela says he will discuss the car bombing when he meets this evening with South African President F.W. de Klerk. At the time of the blast, Mandela was at a campaign stop in Durban, a stronghold of Inkatha rival Mangosuthu Buthelezi. Our man in Durban, Mike Hanna, was at the rally. He joins us now. Mike?
Bernie, it's the end of a long campaign for Nelson Mandela here in the coastal city of Durban. And if there were any doubts about the size of his support in the region, they were certainly laid to rest. A massive show of ANC strength in the Zulu heartland. Tens of thousands gather in the largest rally of a long campaign, and no sign of the political conflict that threatened to rip this region apart. The sheer size of this crowd constitutes political evidence, proof that the ANC does enjoy substantial support in the predominantly Zulu Natal province. Amidst the crowd, a sense of surging excitement, the end of 3 centuries of white oppression only days away.
After all those struggles, after all the bitterness and misery, we are now there, ending one journey and beginning a new one.
a new journey, a new government and a new president. And for the first time, each of those here will have a say in the process. It's the end of the campaign, but Nelson Mandela will remain on the political treadmill. There's likely to be ongoing meetings between him and the man that is likely to replace State President F.W. de Klerk. Bernie.
Mike, I'm curious, why was Nelson Mandela in Natal province on the final day of his campaign?
Well, Natal province is the heartland and the home to some 7 to 8 million Zulu-speaking people. This is the largest single constituency in South Africa. Nelson Mandela has long been, to a point, angered by speculation that Zulus support the Inkatha Freedom Party. What he did today was laid this myth to rest once and for all. He has often said that numerous Zulus do support the ANC, and today he went a long way to proving that, Bernie.
Thank you. Mike Hanna, live from Durban. As Nelson Mandela was on Inkatha leader Buthelezi's turf, so Buthelezi was on Mandela's. Buthelezi attended a campaign rally in the ANC-dominated township of Soweto, outside Johannesburg. Our man Brent Sadler was there, and he's been following Buthelezi along the campaign trail.
Thanks, Bernie. It was shortly after the Johannesburg bomb attack that Inkatha's chief, Mangosuthu Buthelezi, was in the township of Soweto, attending a rally in front of at least 10,000 people. There were fears that in the aftermath of the bomb blast, it might prove inflammatory. A stadium in the township was barely half filled with his supporters, who numbered around 10,000. Dr. Buthelezi arrived from his power base in Ulundi, where he had to calm down his supporters following the killing of 3 ANC workers by an angry mob. Under pressure to condemn violence in the strongest possible terms, the Inkatha leader urged all South Africans to lay down their weapons and support a free and fair election. The Johannesburg bombing, he warned, was an act of destabilization, which did not augur well for next week's ballot.
I believe that there's been too much intimidation in this country, and I see that explosion of the bomb as an act of intimidation. And I'm just hoping and praying that that kind of thing is not going to escalate, because we clearly cannot enter into South Africa amidst, bombings of that kind.
What does it symbolize, that attack today?
Well, it symbolizes that in South Africa today, the prospects really for a free and fair election are very dim indeed. That's what it symbolizes to me.
His followers headed for home with Dr. Buthelezi's appeals ringing in their ears. Security was heavy as they headed for hostels in Soweto and far beyond. Despite the potential for violence, it did pass off peacefully. Well, Inkatha's chief has gone through all the motions of campaigning despite his late start to the election. But given his avowed intent to boycott a government of national unity, should he do well, Dr. Buthelezi may yet prove to be an even greater thorn in the side of his more powerful opponents. Bernie.
Brent, because his is an 11th hour effort, how has Buthelezi handled his tactics?
Well, all along he wanted to sabotage the elections. He did not want them to happen. So consequently today he was continuing to ask for the state of emergency to be lifted even at this late hour. And I think part of his strategy is to say to his supporters, his loyalists who number many hundreds of thousands in the KwaZulu stronghold, to impress upon them that no matter what happens in the vote, and he is expected to get a pasting of course, that he will still continue to fight for his position as the leader of his people in KwaZulu. Whether he achieves that remains to be seen, of course, because of the constitutional talks last week centered on addressing the King's demands. As yet, Dr. Buthelezi does not have his future secure in any way whatsoever.
In terms of post-election, as you indicated, he expects to get a drubbing. What's the strategy then for Buthelezi?
Well, I think what we're seeing quite clearly from his campaign rallies and interviews, I've spent quite a bit of time with him this past few weeks, he wants to be able to be in a position that if he does go down in flames, he can blame, one, the state of emergency in KwaZulu-Natal, and two, the fact that there have been bombings and killings in the run-up to the election. He will declare it that it is not free and fair.
Thank you, Brent Sadler. A little later, we'll return to CNN Center for a look at the life of Richard Niehaus Nixon. Coming up next from Johannesburg, we'll hear from a leader of the one white right faction actually participating in South Africa's election.